Hello everyone from the University of Sewing. This is Denise. Thank you for joining us again as we work some more on our Granny's 1930 sampler. This is a book written by Ricky Timms. Those of you that have been in the quilting world for a little while are probably very familiar with Ricky. He is a well-known, well-respected, well-awarded quilter. He has written a very lovely little novel, something fun to read with some young people in your life. This book would be great even if the young people that you're close to aren't geographically close. Maybe you could do it together, through Facebook or Zoom or even over the phone. I think it would be fun if your young friend maybe had a copy of the book and you had a copy of the book and you could read it together that way. So the pattern, the book that we're working through, the blocks in this are based on the story in the novel, which is a really neat thing to do. It's a fun idea, I think. We are slowly but surely making our way through the 42 blocks in this pattern. This time we're going to talk about block number 16, which is a Sawtooth Star. But before we get too far into that, let's back up and talk about the last block that we worked on, which was number 15. And this is just a very sweet little 9 patch. I think it's called the double 9 patch. What's fun about this one, the solid squares would be a great opportunity to do. You could either do some fussy cutting with some fun fabrics, or it's a neat place to show off some fun quilting. So lots of ideas there. Again, each of these blocks is fantastic on their own. You could do an entire quilt out of this and it would be super cute, I think. So this was the block that we talked about last time. This time we're going to talk about one that you're probably also familiar with. This is called the Sawtooth Star. And this is the block that we did as a test block. And there are some oopses and errors in this block. And I bet if you look kind of carefully, you can probably pick them out. And normally I tell you, don't point out your errors to anybody. Don't show them off. If they can't find them, good for you and too bad for them, right? But I'm going to show you what went wrong with this one and what I think my mistakes were, so that maybe that will save you some trouble when you work on yours, which is especially useful, I think, if you haven't done this block before. So if you look here, we've got some nice points on the end. This is a traditionally pieced block. It is not a paper piece block, so getting those sharp points is a little more challenging, but it always looks fantastic in the end. If you look where these two triangles intersect, that looks pretty good. I'm not unhappy with that. And I'm not unhappy with this one. I think that one looks pretty good. But let's look over here. Look at these guys. They're close, but not quite. And then, my goodness, look at this one. That's nearly 1/4 of an inch between those two. So the question is, what happened? How did it end up that way? Well, as I was assembling this row, I realized it didn't fit and I was having to do some fudging, which happens sometimes, but it was more than I expected to do. Really, this was simply an attention to detail. This was not paying attention to the placement of the smaller triangle pieces on my larger triangle pieces, and then not trimming them down to the proper size so that things would fit here. This piece is 4.5 inches unfinished. So our pattern book doesn't give you dimensions for, say, this piece, but knowing that this is 4.5 inches, you know that at least this side will have to be 4.5 in order to match up. So we're gonna work on that today. I'm gonna show you some pointers and some tips, some things that worked, and maybe you can avoid having your points not quite line up, because really, once I realized that's what it was really disappointing and no fun. So let's move on to something that works a little better. The block that we're doing today, I'll let you take a peek here. You can see these intersections came out much better. I was much happier with these. And again, this block would be a great one to do some fussy cutting if you've got a large motif that you want to use in this 4.5 inch section here, or again, to show off some really pretty quilting, either machine quilting or maybe some hand quilting. Let's finish this guy off. So we've got these two squares that we know are going to go here, and that means these 3 triangles are going to go in the middle. Now, let's pay attention to the way they're directed. We're going to put the point of our mountain down as part of our finished block. So that's going to go this way, going to go this way, and this way. However, to piece it, I'm going to turn it the other way around. And let me explain to you why. To make sure that things were fitting the way I wanted them to, I'm looking at this piece, the large triangle, and I'm calling this my mountain. I've got the mountain top here. I'm going to take the smaller triangle on this side, flip it over, and the question is, where do you line it up? Do you line it up with the points matching at the top of the mountain, at the bottom of the mountain, or do you find the middle and go somewhere in between? The most success that I had is if you match them at the bottom piece. And the way I could remember, so I did not confuse myself as I worked through this block, was that if you're going to climb a mountain, you're going to start at the bottom and you're going to go up. So that's where I'm going to match my points. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where I'm going to start sewing, but that's where I want things to line up nice and evenly. That looks pretty good. So let's see what we can do with this guy. We'll pull our threads out here. We've got our old friend, the 880 Plus Bernina machine. We're using the stitch number 1326, which is great for piecing quilt pieces, quilt blocks. I'll hold my threads. We're also using the 97D foot. It's got this guide on it, which helps keep my 1/4 inch seam consistent. The 97 foot, I think we've talked about before, is best for the 9mm stitch width. It actually covers those feed dogs a little better. You could certainly use a 37 or a 57, which is also one of my favorites. Alrighty, so just to give you an idea, then when we open this guy up, we've got some dog ears we're gonna have to trim off, but that's okay. But that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to just finger press this just to make sure it's out of the way. And let's do this guy, and we're gonna do the same thing. Here's the bottom of my mountain. We're gonna fold this over and we're going to line this guy up over here. Before I get too far, I am gonna trim this off so that he's not in the way, because that would make my piecing a little wiggly, and with these bias triangles, a little wiggly can be problematic sometimes, so let's just eliminate that. All right, so back we go. Lining up again at the bottom of our mountain. And this time I am going to start here. It really is just personal preference. I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, you're going to start at the pointy end of the triangle. Well, if I've got my straight stitch plate on, that pointy end is not going to get sucked into my machine. If that's an issue for you with your machine sometimes, look and see if you've got a straight stitch plate, if that's an option for your machine. The Berninas all have that as an option, I believe. And if not, that's a good place to use your leaders and enders, which is basically just a scrap of fabric that you start. And I'm gonna have Kayla zoom in really close. I want you to see the needle, as we keep going straight, is gonna come just about at the intersection point of those two pieces. And if it were perfect, it would hit at that intersection point. We're gonna be pretty darn close though. So let's keep going. I'm gonna stick my hand probably right in the way. Just a thread or two off. Let's trim those threads. And let's see what this guy looks like. And again, we've talked before about the bias edges on the triangles. You don't want to handle them too much. That'll wiggle them out of shape. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go over to the iron. We're going to press, and then we're going to talk about trimming this so that it fits when it comes time to put it together. Because really, it's no fun. You get this little portion of it done. You're very happy with it. You're happy with your triangle points. And then you go to attach it to the other part and it doesn't fit. No fun. Definitely frustrating. So let's start here. And we're just gonna set that seam a little bit. And this is a good place to remind you, as well as myself, that when you're pressing these, it really is about pressing, meaning up and down, not back and forth. If you do back and forth, you are more likely to stretch those bias edges. And when you've gone through all the effort to cut precisely, to sew precisely. And then you take your iron and you do this and you stretch it out of shape. So frustrating, you've wasted all that work. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's go over here and we're gonna talk about how to trim this guy. Let's get some threads out of the way. Alrighty, so from this point here, the intersection of this seam line and this seam line, we need 1/4 of an inch from that intersection point to the edge of our fabric here. That will help us make sure we don't lose the point on this side. And when we add it to the other part, it'll be exactly where it needs to be. So let's get that guy trimmed off. We're gonna line up this 1/4 inch line here. And it's actually looking pretty good. So you can see I've got this dotted line here. It's gonna be 1, 2.5 inches, which is what we want. We're gonna trim off this excess. And that one's out of the way. Now let's see how these are looking down here. Let's just measure. And that looks pretty good, 2.5 inches there. How about our 4.5? I'm gonna use the other end of our ruler just to make sure everybody can see what we're looking at. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and it looks a little short. Well, let's see what happens. Let's trim off these dog ears. And then we'll match it up with our other blocks and cross our fingers. And sometimes that'll work and sometimes not so much. But you know what? That's okay, because that means we're learning something different, which I always think is the coolest part. So we've got those off.
And nobody's perfect.
And nobody's perfect. And no block is perfect, I promise. So this one is 2.5 inches square. I think that's going to fit pretty nicely on there. All right, let's go back over to the sewing machine and see what happens when we finish this guy off. So we've got it lined up nice and square here. Remember, when you're lining up, if you're sewing here, also be mindful of this side as well as this side. And that will help you with your accuracy and things simply being square. Somebody asked me recently, what was the secret to getting things nice and square and that consistent 1/4 inch seam? And that was an opportunity to talk about how it all matters. The cutting, the sewing, the pressing, the knot stretching, the knot tugging. It all really does add up. Looking pretty good. Let's add one more. And again, this is a 2.5 inch square that we're going to add on. I think that looks pretty nice. Let's get this thread over here. Make sure we haven't wiggled anybody out of the way. There's a little piece there that I'm going to trim off, because I'm afraid he's going to be distracting. And I can tell, I'm just peeking here, but I can see this bottom one has moved over underneath the top. So I'm just gonna juggle these guys back into position a little bit. And those of you that pin, that may not be an issue for you, or if you use your wonderful Wonder clips. One more trim of threads here. Let's trim this one and this one. Do you guys trim as you go? I'm curious. Or do you wait till the end and trim them all? I'm a trim as you go kind of a girl. Alrighty. That one looks pretty good. So let's see, if we look at the back of this one, we can see this lower portion, this section here, the seams are pressed out away from the center. So that's what we're going to do to this one, because the center row, they're pressed towards the center, and then things will nest and lay nice and flat. So let's go press these out, and then we can attach this guy. I think it's going to be awful cute. Just a reminder too, guys, all the stuff that you're seeing, we do have here in the shop. The website is theuniversityofsewing.com. Of course, it's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's always new stuff and fun stuff coming in. And I would encourage you to check it out, see what kind of sales and fun events we've got going on. If you have any questions at all about anything that we're doing or anything that you see that you're wondering how does it work or is it worth it, our email is also part of that website, and it's info@universityofsewing.com. Send us a note. This is always one of my favorite parts of putting a block together. So we've got our block here, we've got our last row, and now we're going to line up these seams. And I think that's pretty darn close, guys. So we're going to flip this over, and we're going to nest these seams. You can see this one is going to my left, and this one on the back is going to go to the right. I'm going to push them together, and with my fingers, I'm pushing the top one to my right and the bottom one to my left so that they kind of lock. They bump up against that ridge that the seam makes. So I can tell that they're exactly where I want them. I'm going to hold them there, straighten this one up. Get my thread out of the way here. I'm using my knee lift, which I love. Lower that presser foot, and we're going to keep on going. And notice my finger is still right on top of that seam. So nothing has moved. Now I'm going to stop here and just see what's going on down at this seam. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this top one and bump it up against that fold of that bottom seam, and you can feel it. And I'm going to use my fingers to hold that in place. Make sure these raw edges are lined up. And as we're sewing down, the goal is going to be that that seam line will hit right here at this intersection of this seam, and that will mean that that point, when we open up our block, we will have a beautiful point. It won't be chopped off and it won't be too big. I'll slow down here, and it looks like it's going to be a little off, but I think we'll be all right. When you're doing this block, I did find it was really important to square up those pieces. So make sure you have a good ruler. A 2.5-inch ruler is a very handy thing to use. We've got some wonderful square ones here in the shop. Let's trim this thread, and we'll open it up, and I'll hold my breath as you cross your fingers for me. Ready? Drum roll. Well, so I would have liked it to have come up a little higher, but I think with pressing, I can make that work. So I'll just finger press here, we'll finger press here, a little bit here. Let's go press this guy and finish it off. I sure do like those colors together though. I think this one would be a fun one to do on point. Wouldn't that be pretty? All right, so press these seams to the outside of the block. And we'll give it a little shot of steam. This is a great place for my favorite tool that I forgot, my tailor's clapper. I feel like I could do that commercial that says, "Don't leave home without it." Don't sew without your tailor's clapper. And I'm pulling this just a little bit to straighten it, not so much to stretch it, just to straighten it. Alrighty, let's go back and compare that to our test block and see what we think this time. We want to look at these points here on the edge. We've got a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance left on all of those, so we're not going to lose those when we put these blocks together. We've got nice overlap here. That's much better than some of our little oops and uh-oh errors that we had on this one. But you know what? I think they're super cute. I hope you guys enjoy making this one. I like the simplicity of this one. I love the 3-color idea. You can do some 2-tone things. You could do 3 very different prints. You could have a lot of fun with this block. We've also got the little seam roller that I do like to use, but I did not use today. And like I said, we've got some great rulers for you to play with. One of my favorites, of course, is the Olfa. This is just a nice size square, and it's a frosted one, which is really nice for some of the other fabrics. It's a little easier to see. And then, of course, this is a really cool package of them. And you do get 4 different squares. And again, these are all on the website, theuniversityofsewing.com. This was block number 16, Sawtooth Star. Next time we're going to talk about, I do want to show you this one because I kind of want you to be thinking about it. Block number 17 is going to be a little bit of a challenge. Who's up for a New York beauty? I say we jump right in, see what we can do with it. I think it's going to be fun, and I've got some cool kind of bonus ideas for you. So make sure you check back in a couple weeks when we post the video for this one. In the meantime, have fun with your Sawtooth Star. If there's anything else we can do for you, the email is info@universityofsewing. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.